Have you ever noticed something strange? The more you explain yourself, the less respected you feel. You give reasons. You clarify your intentions. You try to make everyone comfortable, and yet somehow, people still question you, still push back, still treat you like you owe them something. That's not a coincidence. There's a hidden power dynamic happening every time you over-explain. And most people never see it because when you keep explaining, you're not adding clarity. You're handing away control. But the moment you stop, everything shifts. People pause. They feel uneasy. They start paying attention. Not because you said more, but because you said less. Psychology shows that silence, when used correctly, creates authority. It signals certainty. It forces others to reveal their intentions instead of hiding behind questions. And here's the part no one warns you about. When you stop explaining yourself, some people will feel threatened. They'll call you distant, cold, even arrogant. But what they're really reacting to is the loss of influence over you. In this video, I'll break down exactly why this happens, how to stop explaining without becoming rude or aggressive, and the one mistake that will instantly give your power back if you're not careful. Stay with me, because once you understand this, you'll never communicate the same way again. Most people explain themselves for one simple reason. They want approval. Not because they're weak, not because they're incapable, but because they were trained that way. From a young age, we're taught that being understood equals being safe. So we learn to justify everything. Why we did something, why we said no, why we feel the way we feel. If someone questions us, our nervous system panics, and we rush to explain. Psychology calls this approval-seeking behavior, but beneath that label is something deeper. Your brain is trying to avoid rejection. It believes, if I explain clearly enough, they'll see I'm not a bad person. If I give enough reasons, they won't get upset. If they understand me, they'll accept me. So you talk more, you add details, you defend yourself before you're even attacked. But here's the truth no one prepares you for. Explanations don't create respect. Certainty does. And certainty isn't loud. It's calm. It's brief. It doesn't rush. Every extra explanation sends a subtle signal. I'm not fully confident in this choice. I'm open to being challenged. I need you to agree with me. People may not consciously recognize it, but they feel it. And once they feel it, they push. They ask more questions. They poke holes. They test your boundaries. Not because they're evil, but because uncertainty invites pressure. Here's the hard truth. The more you explain, the more you train people to believe your decisions are negotiable. And the moment your decisions become negotiable, your authority disappears. This isn't about being cold or distant. It's about learning a new internal rule. You don't need permission to stand by your choices. When you stop explaining to be accepted, you start speaking from certainty. And that's where real respect begins. Every time you over-explain, there's a hidden message being sent. And it's not in your words. It's in your intention. Without realizing it, over-explaining communicates three things. I'm not fully confident in this decision. I need your permission to stand by it. And your reaction has power over how I feel. You may never say these sentences out loud, but people don't need to hear them. They sense them. Human beings are extremely sensitive to emotional cues. Tone, pacing, hesitation, nervous energy. Psychologists call this status leakage. It's what happens when your internal uncertainty leaks into your communication, even if your logic sounds reasonable. And here's the important part. You're not losing power because of what you say. You're losing power because of why you're saying it. When your motivation is fear, fear of disapproval, conflict, or rejection, people feel it immediately. And once they feel it, they unconsciously step into a higher position. They interrupt more. They question you harder. They feel entitled to your time, your energy, your explanations, not because they're cruel, but because your communication invited it. Status isn't about dominance or aggression. It's about emotional self-containment. The person who doesn't need to convince, doesn't need to defend, and doesn't need to explain is the person others instinctively respect. The moment your words come from self-trust instead of self-protection, the leakage stops. And so does the control others have over you. Silence is deeply uncomfortable for insecure people, not because silence is rude, but because silence removes their leverage. When you stop explaining yourself, something important happens. They can't poke holes in your logic. They can't twist your words. They can't pull you into guilt or emotional chaos. Your calm presence gives them nothing to grab onto. And that's where discomfort begins. Most people rely on reactions to feel in control. They expect you to fill the space, to reassure, to soften, to justify. So when you don't, their nervous system panics. Psychology calls this psychological projection. Instead of sitting with their discomfort, they project it onto you. Suddenly you're labeled cold, distant, hard to talk to, arrogant. But notice something important. These accusations aren't descriptions. They're defenses. They're attempts to pressure you back into the old role, the explainer, the pleaser, the one who makes them comfortable. Your silence doesn't harm them. It simply removes access. And when access disappears, people who relied on it feel exposed. This doesn't mean everyone who reacts is malicious. Some people simply aren't used to emotional boundaries, but the reaction tells you everything you need to know. Secure people don't fear silence. They respect it. Insecure people fear it because silence forces them to face their own uncertainty. Here's the key shift. When you stay calm, grounded, and quiet, you're not punishing anyone. You're regulating yourself. And self-regulation looks like power to anyone who's used to control through emotion. So if someone reacts strongly to your silence, don't rush to explain. That reaction isn't about you. It's about the control they just lost. Here's the exact moment the power dynamic changes. The moment you answer less than expected. Most people think power comes from saying the perfect thing, explaining clearly, covering every angle. But psychology shows the opposite. Power appears when your response is complete without being excessive. Look at the difference. A weak response sounds like this. I didn't reply because I was busy and had a lot going on, and I didn't want you to think I was ignoring you. It's long, it's defensive, and it's filled with emotional insurance. Now compare it to this. I was unavailable. That's it. No apology, no backstory, no emotional cleanup. Why does this work? Because your nervous system stays regulated. You're not rushing. You're not justifying. You're not trying to manage someone else's feelings. And when your nervous system stays calm, something interesting happens. Theirs doesn't. They expected more words, more reassurance, more access. Instead, they're left with certainty, and certainty is disarming. Short responses communicate, I'm comfortable with this decision. I don't need approval. I'm not open to negotiation. This doesn't provoke healthy people. It stabilizes them. But to someone used to control, it feels like the ground just shifted. They may pause. They may push again. They may test you. That's not failure. That's confirmation. The goal isn't to sound cold. The goal is to sound complete. When your answer leaves no emotional hooks, there's nothing to pull on, and that's the moment control changes hands. Not through force, but through calm, contained authority. High status individuals don't over-explain, not because they're arrogant, not because they lack empathy, but because they trust their decisions. Psychology calls this internal validation, the ability to approve yourself without waiting for permission. When you validate yourself internally, your communication changes automatically. You stop chasing understanding. You don't panic when someone disagrees. You don't feel the need to convince anyone to see your side. Your boundaries stop sounding like requests and start sounding like statements. I've decided. That doesn't work for me. I'm moving forward. No tension, no emotional charge, and people feel this instantly. Human beings are wired to detect certainty. We pick up on it through tone, pacing, and presence, long before logic enters the picture. That's why confident people speak less, not because they have nothing to say, but because every word has weight. They don't argue their boundaries because boundaries aren't debates. They don't negotiate their worth because worth isn't something to prove. This doesn't make them unkind. It makes them clear. And clarity is deeply respectful. Confidence isn't loud. It doesn't dominate the room. It doesn't demand attention. Real confidence is quiet, grounded, and intentional. It uses fewer words because it doesn't need backup. When you stop explaining to be believed, people stop questioning your authority. Not because you forced respect, but because you embodied it. Here's something most people never connect. Over-explaining isn't a communication flaw, it's a trauma response. If you grew up around angry parents, critical authority figures, or unpredictable emotional reactions, your nervous system adapted. You learned a survival rule early on. Explain fast or get hurt. So you explained your intentions, you justified your feelings, you tried to stay one step ahead of conflict. And for a long time, that strategy worked. It kept you safe. It reduced tension. It helped you avoid emotional punishment. But here's the painful shift. What once protected you now exposes you. As an adult, over-explaining signals fear instead of safety. It attracts control instead of understanding. It drains your energy instead of calming your nervous system. You're no longer a child trying to survive chaos, but your body hasn't updated the rule yet. Healing begins with awareness. When you realize, I don't need to justify my feelings. I don't need to explain my boundaries. I don't need permission to exist. Silence stops feeling dangerous and starts feeling grounding. This isn't about becoming cold or disconnected. It's about becoming regulated. When your nervous system learns that you're safe without over-explaining, your words naturally become fewer and stronger. And the more you trust yourself, the less you feel the urge to convince anyone else. When you stop explaining yourself, not everyone will be comfortable. In fact, there are 3 types of people who tend to react the strongest, and their reactions are never random. First, controllers. These are people who rely on your emotional responses to feel powerful. Your explanations give them access. Your silence removes it. So when you stop feeding the dynamic, they feel exposed and threatened. Second, emotional leeches. They don't want clarity, they want reassurance. They feed on guilt, apologies, and emotional labor. Your over-explaining keeps them regulated. When you stop, they suddenly feel unsettled. Third, insecure competitors. Your calm confidence challenges their self-image. They're used to feeling superior through criticism or pressure. Your silence levels the playing field, and they don't like that. When you stop explaining, these people often react in predictable ways. They get angry. They play the victim. They accuse you of changing. But pay attention. These reactions aren't evidence that you're doing something wrong. They're evidence that the old dynamic no longer works. Healthy people adjust. Unhealthy dynamics resist. So if someone becomes uncomfortable when you stop justifying yourself, take it as information, not a warning. Sometimes the strongest confirmation comes from the people who can no longer control you. This part matters because silence alone can be misunderstood. But calm clarity is unmistakable. The goal isn't to disappear or shut people out. The goal is to communicate without leaking emotion or over-explaining. And that starts with how you speak. Use short sentences, a neutral, steady tone, no emotional charge, not rushed, not defensive, not cold, just grounded. Simple statements are powerful because they leave no opening for debate. That doesn't work for me. I've made my decision. I'm not discussing this further. Notice what's missing. No justification, no apology, no attempt to manage their reaction. This isn't rude. It's clear. Rudeness attacks the person. Clarity states the boundary. When you stay consistent, something shifts. People stop pushing. They stop testing. They stop asking the same question in different ways. Why? Because consistency builds credibility. If you explain once, then explain again. You teach people that persistence works. But when your response stays the same, calm, brief, and steady, you communicate something powerful. This boundary isn't emotional, it's structural. Respect doesn't come from perfect wording. It comes from repetition without escalation. So don't raise your voice. Don't add reasons. Don't get pulled into the loop. Say it once. Mean it. Then stand still. That's how you stop explaining without ever becoming rude. Here's the one mistake that destroys all of this power. Explaining after you've already stopped. You set a boundary. You give a short, calm response. You finally hold your ground, and then you feel the tension. The silence feels awkward. They push again. They look confused or offended. So you jump back in. You add one more sentence, one more reason, one more explanation. And in that moment, the power shifts back to them. Why? Because you just taught them something important. If they wait long enough, if they push a little harder, you'll break. The dynamic resets. The boundary becomes negotiable again. And next time, they push even harder. Silence only works when it's final. Not dramatic, not cold, not angry, just complete. Completion doesn't need closure. It doesn't need agreement. It doesn't need understanding. It only needs consistency. The urge to re-explain usually isn't about logic. It's about discomfort. Your nervous system wants relief. It wants the tension to stop. But that discomfort is temporary. If you can sit with it, breathe through it, and stay grounded, the power holds. And eventually, something clicks for the other person. There's nothing more to extract. That's when respect replaces pressure. Not because you argued better, but because you didn't argue at all. When you truly master this, something surprising happens. Life gets quieter. People stop questioning you. Not because you became intimidating, but because your certainty became clear. Conversations get shorter, cleaner, more respectful. There's less back and forth, less defending, less emotional exhaustion. And here's an important shift most people don't expect. Manipulative dynamics begin to disappear. Not through confrontation, not through drama, but through lack of access. People who relied on guilt, pressure, or confusion move on when they realize it no longer works. At the same time, something changes inside you. Your anxiety drops. Your body no longer feels the urgency to explain, fix, or smooth everything over. Your nervous system learns a new truth. I am safe without explaining. I don't need to manage other people's emotions. I can be calm and still be respected. That's emotional freedom. You start responding instead of reacting, choosing words instead of spilling them. trusting yourself instead of chasing approval. And the more regulated you become, the more natural your authority feels. This isn't about cutting people off. It's about cutting off unnecessary effort. When your energy stops leaking, your presence becomes stronger. And strong presence doesn't need many words, just needs alignment. This isn't just theory. This is something you practice in everyday life. At work, when a conversation keeps looping, you don't need to defend your competence. You simply say, I've already addressed this. No added explanation, no emotional charge. In relationships, when someone keeps questioning your choices, you don't need to convince them. You say, I'm comfortable with my choice. That statement isn't cold. It's self-trust, spoken out loud. With family, where pressure often hides behind concern, you don't argue your boundaries. You say, I'm not debating this. And then you stop. No follow-up, no justification, no emotional cleanup. Here's the key. Say it once, mean it. Then stand still. Most people keep talking because they're afraid of the silence. But silence is what seals the boundary. Every time you repeat yourself, you teach people that persistence works. Every time you stay consistent, you teach them something different. This is not up for negotiation. You don't teach people how to treat you with speeches or explanations. You teach them through tolerance. What you allow continues. What you stop engaging with ends. And the more you practice this, the less effort it takes. Because respect grows where boundaries are calm and clear. Here's the truth most people never learn. You don't owe explanations to people who don't respect your boundaries. The moment you stop explaining, you stop auditioning for approval. You stop shrinking yourself to be understood. You stop leaking energy into conversations that go nowhere. You stop giving access to people who never planned to respect you anyway. And something powerful replaces it. Quiet authority. Not the kind that argues, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that's felt the moment you speak or don't. If you're still watching, this isn't random. This is your sign to reclaim your power. You were never meant to be understood by everyone. You were meant to be grounded within yourself. Clarity doesn't need applause. Boundaries don't need agreement. Confidence doesn't need an audience. Some people will never like this version of you, the one who explains less, reacts less, and stands firm. That's okay, because peace doesn't come from being liked. It comes from being aligned. So if this message hit something real inside you, comment, I choose silence below. And remember this, the calmest person in the room is never weak. They're the one no one can control.